Welcome back to Partnerships Unraveled, the podcast where we dive deep into the mysteries and the secrets of partnerships and the channel. My name is Michel. I'm head of marketing at Nutanix, and I'll be your host for today. I'm really happy to chat with David Turner, distribution leader for EMEA at Nutanix. I've really been looking forward to this one. How are you, David?
I'm very, very well. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah, I think we just said this is a good way to kick off the week, Monday morning. Let's go.
Absolutely. The sun's shining, really up for it. I'm sure it's going to be a great conversation.
And we're stuck inside having a digital podcast. Yeah, I love it. We'll go outside after this. No, fantastic. Great to speak to you. To kick off, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and your role at Nutanix?
Yeah, absolutely. So currently I'm the distribution leader here at Nutanix. So what that means is it's my role to help us scale, create long-term growth across our partner ecosystem. I've been in the industry now for just about 26 years, which is scary to say. Started my career at distribution, so the first 11 years there, and then had various roles across the vendor ecosystem since there. So yeah, I think I have that kind of experience both on the inside and the outside of the vendor landscape, working with our distributors. So it gives me a bit of a balanced view about kind of where their strengths are, what's working, where there's opportunity for growth. But most importantly, it very much keeps me busy across the EMEA theater. So yeah, really looking forward to kind of talking about my experience, I guess.
Awesome. No, I think it's so incredibly important for people to have that multi-layered experience on kind of both sides of the aisle. Specifically, from my perspective, it comes to understanding people's challenges more than understanding the positives, right? Knowing how to kind of navigate the landscape. But yeah, I think that's a fascinating point to start. So you spent quite some time across both distribution and vendor environments. So one thing I'm always curious about, when you look back on that, what has stayed the same when it comes to good channel leadership, and what has changed the most?
Great question. So I think the thing that is very much the same is that, this is a people industry. And so the strongest channel leaders have been the ones that have been able to connect best with our channel partners in that ecosystem. And that's probably represented in a few ways, but thinking about the trust that they build, the clarity of vision that they're able to communicate, and then really focusing on mutual profitability. And what that means is that they stand behind the things that they say. So they walk the walk rather than just talking the talk. And the talk that they give is super clear. So, be very intentional around the work that we want to do, the outcomes that we want to achieve together. They're laser focused on making sure everybody understands the role that they can play. And importantly, that there's profitability for both sides on that, understanding the profit pools, really getting how the mechanics of not just the business, but the people within the business, and taking the time to understand how that works. The real successful channel leaders are the ones that kind of embody those kind of characteristics. And I've been fortunate to work under quite a few of those in my time. So yeah, very much that's kind of what's been the core consistency. If I think about what's changing, well, the complexity of the landscape is very different now than perhaps what it was when I first started. So
Really?
yeah, definitely. That's one of the things that's, very obvious. The meetings that we're having at the moment, perhaps traditionally, the channel was more about fulfillment. And now it's increasingly complex, the different ways that customers are looking to build their solutions out. There's this orchestration element that comes in. And so being able to navigate through different technology types, hanging things together, the services wrap that comes with all that, far more complex, the different partner types we need to engage with. So, that's the challenge that's out there for channel leaders today, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a great point from both sides, like vendor side and disty or partner side. I completely agree. There's so many more things to have to take care of. I mean, when you're a vendor and you're building out your product or your solutions or your platform, you have to think about, hey, how does this fit into an ecosystem? How can I allow my disties to effectively position this in the market? And then as a disty, you have to think about, hey, do I understand the security implications of what I'm actually packaging? How will this work in the long run? So yeah, I fully agree. It's very different than the last mile support these companies used to do. Where it's like, oh yeah, by the way, what partner do you work with? Let's get them in on the deal and push it forward, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you also raised a good point that what never changes is that people are people, right? And I think they desire real connection and real value. On the other hand, I like that you raised the point that it's about profitability. And it reminds me of what I used to say to the teams I manage. It's like, hey, I want you to have the best time here. But there's one thing that we have to remember, and that's that we're getting paid to do a job. We need to make money. But when you balance those two things, I think it becomes very kind of organic to build relationships with an end goal in mind, right? But yeah, at the end of the day, I think the effort I put into building a business relationship still depends for a large part on the connection with the person sitting across from me, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've certainly learned that, you need to be in the trenches. It kind of cast my mind back for the numerous quarter ends that I've worked alongside distribution with. You know, I've been there in the office with them until midnight. This isn't me dialing in from home, expecting them to kind of do all the work and kind of at 9 p.m. It's like, let's make sure all those orders happen, please. I want to be there helping, supporting. We've got locked inside an office once because everybody thought we'd gone home. So we had to get out through a fire escape. I mean, these are the things you learn maybe to advise the building security in future. But yeah, it's a people business at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry. I just got a memory that popped into my head. I'll never forget that sometimes when I was working at this deep tech scale up, sometimes we come in on Saturday, not because we were so hardcore, blah, but sometimes you just, you had a big proposal or whatever to work on. And we kind of got so used to that there was someone in the office on Saturday that I once came in on a Saturday, I bleeped in my key card and all the alarms went off because there was no one there and I just hadn't thought of calling the security people. So I had to explain to the police why I was standing there at the lobby of my office with all these computers around me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we've all experienced that. I love that. Um, if we stick with the theme on of like how we build those relationships and how important they are, you've worked on both the vendor and the disty side. You worked throughout the ecosystem, so I'm sure you've seen kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to building these strong partnerships. Every time I speak to a channel leader, I hear the same thing. How do we balance scale with value? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. How do you balance those kind of large scale, proven strategic relationships that you know on the one hand, while also kind of looking into the broader untapped opportunity in your partner base that might not be as apparent from the start?
Yeah, so I think the key thing here is just having a very sensible and pragmatic segmentation strategy. So, looking at the resources that we have within our business, making sure that for those large partners, the strategic partnerships are incredibly important to look after. That's probably where your deeper levels of investment go. Those partners probably pick up on your partner strategies that little bit quicker, but it's definitely not an either or strategy that you need. Absolutely. And, part of my role is owning that piece on the partners that we have a less deep relationship with. And that's where working with distributors to access those, just make sure that we have the ability to identify those kind of partners on the rise. Who are the people that we haven't discovered yet? And, I've kind of touched on some of the complexity of the modern environments that we're looking to solve. There's, new challenges coming down around containers, definitely around generative AI.
Hmm.
These are a different set of partners that are perhaps leading the way in those spaces than the traditional ones that, we built stronger relationships with. Our chief revenue officer has a saying that, it all happens out there. And so this is where, how do we go and visit these partners? How do we see them, working with our distributors to make sure that we've got programs to access those partners, and working with the distributors to understand, what data they've got available. Are we making good use of that so that we can go and target partners, identify ones that we can take and, bring them on the next phase of our journey and do that together with them. So yeah, I think it starts with segmentation and then it kind of continues through just making sure you're out and you're visible out in the market to meet those new organizations.
Yeah, I think that also helps because partners have a connection with the market that vendors simply cannot have at the same kind of scale and level, right? So using your partners or your distributors or your MSPs or whatever as the eyes and ears towards the end customer market, to me makes a lot of sense. And I think I'm hearing that more and more, but it's slowly coming in where it's like you're also seeing your partners as trusted advisors on market trends.
Yeah, definitely. So I deliver part of our new hire onboarding process. around the channel for the
Mhm.
internal people at Nutanix. And one of the key things I just make sure they understand, and we're blessed with having very good caliber salespeople here, but it's just making sure that they get that it's not a Nutanix customer. The partners are the ones that are dealing, because we're a through channel route to market, and everything we do is through partners. The partner has the end customer as the customer. Now we have to make sure we're delivering on our part, absolutely. So we're not hands off in that way. We want to deliver a great experience, but the partners, the reseller partners, are the ones that have perhaps been working with those end customers for 20, 30 years, and they've seen them evolve. To ignore that opportunity and leveraging those relationships just seems kind of criminal. So that's where we're very much into make sure the eyes and ears and the hearts kind of follow with it as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's a really important point to mention also for people, for example, who have done direct sales for a very long time and almost feel like partner sales is breaking into their domain. I see it as the exact opposite, where it's like you're basically getting a person in front of you who's done all the legwork, right? They've built the relationship, they understand the market, and all you have to do, it's still a tough job, obviously, but all you have to do is build a relationship with this partner, make sure that you're aligned on the solution set and how well that fits with the market. And then they have the relationship, they have the engagement that you would have to build from scratch if you're a direct sales account manager.
Yeah.
So much easier, right?
Yeah. I mean, the way I position it is that, we're borrowing the relationship that they've spent years building. Treat it, with kid gloves, be protective of that for the partner.
I love that, by the way. We're borrowing the relationship. I think that's really, really good. Hey, I want to switch gears a little bit. I want to talk about working culture because this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. Because I always have to laugh when people, for example, see the term EMEA as like a monolith. I think you have vastly different cultures. You've got different languages, different assumptions, different relationship building practices, from the way you say hello to the way you hand over a business card to, like, it's so broad. So I don't envy the complexity of your domain, but I do want to ask, how do you build a channel strategy that feels like internally aligned and makes the most of your best practices without ignoring the realities and differences of each local market?
So I look at my colleagues that lead the theaters for Americas and APJ with envy sometimes, because I think the complexity and the diversity of EMEA is completely unique. We've got some very mature markets in UK, Germany, places like that, and other really high growth areas as well. And you're right; they do need to take a very different approach. You can't have there is no EMEA. Okay, let's go and run. It's pockets of
Click and deploy,
yeah,
it doesn't work.
and making sure that our colleagues in the US, if they're creating programs, understand that is incredibly important. So, fortunately, we've got great kind of working relationships where we can do that. And I think that's what means that we can build out some things that are very consistent. So we want to make sure that the overarching program, is consistent across all of our different regions. That our core value proposition is probably the same, and that the types of customers that we want to speak to are known and understood, and the ways that partners can take benefit from the program are very clear and very consistent, because what we understand is people want predictability and they want that profitability that kind of comes from it, and to trust us in our route to market. But then the localization is, the types of partners that we might choose to work with. Are we looking more at system integrators? Are we looking at kind of the traditional VAR community? Is it more service provider led? And so having freedom and flexibility to build your route to market, our overall channel leadership, very much kind of hands, the opinion and control of and the strategy creation in the regions down to the region, because they're the ones that understand it best. And then we'll also have things like commercial terms might be slightly different in some of these regions where we need to adjust slightly, where the adoption of certain technology types is further ahead or further behind. So we might put additional sales resource or technical resource in to help support some of those areas. So I think it's overall strategy from a program standpoint and consistency there in the value prop. That's what we want to be consistent, and then the execution, try and localize that as when we need to.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense, and it comes down to, if I hear you correctly, like what points you emphasize, where you add a little bit more effort, where you refocus if, for example, the commercials are more complicated in a certain location, or the technology stack has more kind of complicated hooks to it, that you really hone in on those types of discussions, depending on what region you're in. I think that's a smart approach because one thing I do notice, by the way, is that when you talk about these types of regions, it's also very easy to exaggerate how different we all are, right? Because we are different in many ways, but at the end of the day, I keep coming back to it. We're still people, and if our end goal is profit or success or whatever as a business, then there are just routes to get there the quickest, right? So I think we need to empower people to realize that, right, and that the cultural aspects of it are a kind of a beautiful layer around it that we need to address and respect, but that at the end of the day, we're trying to achieve a goal together.
Yeah, and we've run some programs. So the things that tell me there's some consistency across the personal motivations and dynamics of people across EMEA is we had a program with our distributors where across a fiscal year the distributor can gain points and they're competing against the other distributor called Race to the Olympics. And the winners of this program got to attend the Paris Olympics with us. We've just done the Winter Olympics in Milan and Livigno. And so this is specifically targeted for our EMEA distribution landscape. So we've had people attending from Germany, from the UK, from UAE, just all over the EMEA landscape. And you bring these people together and you put them on a husky dog sled ride, and kind of there's competitive spirit coming out, there's camaraderie. I mean, there's great relationships that are bonded from this. And yeah, people are different, but ultimately there's things that connect us all. And yeah, this is absolutely, definitely, although my language skills could do some do some work, proficient in English, but yeah, there's commonality if you kind of go out and try and find it, and that's kind of what we're keen to do.
Yeah, I love that. And by the way, English is a good start when it comes to
Yeah.
EMEA, right? I think that's a great point, that drive, that to be incentivized to do cool stuff that you normally wouldn't do. I think that's a really fun way to engage people and indeed bring people together towards the same goal. I think that's a fantastic approach. Let me switch gears again. I want to talk a little bit about Nutanix go to market. From what I've read and what you've told me, how Nutanix approaches the market seems to really be built around kind of choice, whether that's like what hardware you use, hypervisors, cloud environments, et cetera, et cetera. Can you tell me a little bit about the advantages of this flexibility for distributors and resellers trying to build services around the platform?
Yeah, I think one of the key things is that it can really reduce friction in the being able to build out the customer outcome. So the choice is driven by the end customer's need to have a solution that works for them. And so if you look at the channel, you know resellers, distributors have created relationships with multiple hardware vendors, the hyperscalers, storage manufacturers. And so being able to talk about having an outcome that can flex to shape exactly what that customer is looking for means that partners can go out with Nutanix knowing that pretty much regardless of what the customer says in terms of what I want, the answer can be yes, we can do that. And in making those separate connections, this is where you mentioned kind of building solutions and services, you know, how that can, be brought to bear. We allow partners to operate as a reseller and as a service provider at the same time because, they've got different ways that they might want to work with their customer base. So having that flexibility really has advantages in that, if a customer has a preference for the hardware or a partner wants to go out with a particular hardware provider, we can say yes to that. And we just try and add value and, be adjacent to the value that the partner's looking to bring to market. So we think it works really well for customers, but also works really well for our partner community, both reseller and distributors. And when it comes to being additive to the additional services that we might look to, bring to market, our ability to leverage all of these existing relationships that the partners had means we can scale perhaps that a little bit quicker than if we didn't have that flexibility. It works from an agility and speed perspective as well.
Yeah, I think being able to say, of course we can, when someone asks, can you integrate with this? Can you run on this? I think that that's a huge benefit. So I've got to be cheeky and ask the flip side as well. Are there any challenges that come with this type of flexibility?
Yeah. So the challenge is it also has a direct solution that I think distribution can give to us. It's the orchestration of this. Sometimes if you've got multiple vendors perhaps being part of that particular sales opportunity, it's making sure that you've got clear communication there so that, the, the hardware side of the house doesn't rub up against what we're doing from a software perspective. So I think, that's where the challenge is to be very open and transparent in the communication, making sure that roles are clear and understood. And so, yeah, that's one of the big things that we have to make sure we're very focused on, is that we don't just create complexity for the customer to manage themselves. We want there to be a solution that's brought together that has complexity to it, because just some things are innately complex.
Complex.
What we're
Yeah.
doing is there's challenges here, right? But trying to give an overall feeling of minimizing the risk, making sure that it doesn't look too challenging of to bring all these strands together, and that's where competent partners are able to help bridge that gap for us.
Yeah, I think it's such a great point, and I'd like to emphasize that again. Like sometimes I've had it in the past as well with really large organizations that you're selling really complicated products to. That their program manager or project manager will moment say, "Why is this all so complicated? There's so much going on. Just to simplify." It's like, but what you want is complicated.
Yeah.
Like the solution you're looking for is a complicated solution with a lot of moving parts. There's no magic fix for that. If that were the case and I would come up with it, then I would be able to retire, right? But
Yeah.
some things are just difficult. There's many things you have to tie together. There's many like compliance regulations and GDPR and security and whatever you have to deal with. And it's not as easy as some people would hope. And I think that's a really good angle to take. Like embrace the complexity, right? Make it as simple as possible, but realize what industry we're in and what goals we're trying to achieve. Are those simple goals? Then the solution should be simple. If they're complicated goals, then the solution's probably going to be complicated.
Yeah, and we've stripped out a lot of the complexity, right? So in terms of the user interface, the design, the taking away tiers of complex siloed infrastructure, and driving that down into a much more simple, unified approach gives us some simplicity, but that will take you so far. So there's services and other things that need to be added on top. So yeah, making sure we're cognizant of that. There is no silver bullet,
Yep.
and it's just a case of trying to find those partners that have the skills, and then maybe that is the silver bullet. It's about having a really strong partner ecosystem where everybody plays their part, and the silver bullet is the orchestration of that.
I love that. Just to build on that a little bit. So let's say distribution, your partner ecosystem is that silver bullet. That doesn't mean they need to stop growing. That doesn't mean the way we look at partner ecosystems has to stop evolving. How does the role of a distributor need to evolve in the next like 2 to 5 years or 2 to 5 months, depending how fast technology goes?
Well, they're doing a great job of moving from being that place that just did fulfillment into something that can be beyond the transaction into transformation. That's where we're headed. And yeah, making sure that they have orchestration of the partner network. That's the value that they need to look at bringing. I think utilizing their data in very effective ways. So how do they incubate partners? How do they allow us to scale? Enablement at scale is a big thing. They've got training services. Are we taking advantage of those? And so, making sure they're transforming and ensuring that they bring relevance in the market. So I definitely am not an advocate of the phrase that distribution is dead. I don't think distribution necessarily reflects the role that distributors play anymore. But once you've got a name, how do you kind of rebrand the whole kind of segment of the channel? That's a challenge. So yeah, just keeping pace with what's out there, looking at the platforms that they're investing in to smooth that some of the base functions that they've done for years, making that a little bit easier. But then it's looking at the additive elements. And so I think the successful distributors and the ones that really kind of, grow and accelerate in the next, let's say, 5 months, 5 years, whatever that time frame looks like, we're the ones that can help customers and partners pivot, because the demands from the reseller and service provider community are perhaps changing. And so there's value there around the different consumption models and commercial flexibility that distributors are bringing to market. They've got all the ability for them to pre-invest in new technology areas, perhaps making sure that those are seen by the partner community of where the partner can build their next 5 months to 5 years business,
Yeah.
making sure that they stay very close to that, speaking to lots of distributors around EMEA. That's something that, feels like it's really core to their mission right now. So I think they're responding very well to it.
I think that's a great angle to take. And again, that comes back to the fact that partners then become more of a trusted advisor to their end customers, because the end customers, I think a lot of people are, including me, by the way, are quite lost as to what's now all possible when it comes to the technology landscape. And if you have a partner that is able to, like you said, be able to pivot, like deal with market changes, technology changes, and always offer the solution that's fit for purpose now and in the future, or at least as far as we can see that, I think that allows end customers to kind of move forward with this trust and flexibility that's required in this day and age. Speaking of advisors, we always ask our podcast guests to nominate the next guest to join the podcast. Who do you think we should have next?
So there were two names that really kind of sprung to mind here. So Andrew Gill from IBM, he's the VP of ecosystems for UK and Ireland, really strong channel heritage, gets it, strong leadership positions, large companies scale. I had the pleasure of working with him at Nutanix as well. I think he'd have some deep insights for you as to how the channels developed over the years, his approach in some large organizations. And also Carl Hausdorff from FSAS, so the newly rebranded Fujitsu product business. So he heads up their AI business there, and he's just a pure technology advocate, evangelist. He's all about it. So I think there's two people there that might have different perspectives, but both of them really valuable. So either of those, I think, would be a great choice.
I love it. I'm already excited, especially when it comes to these technology conversations. They're just blowing my mind. I thought I was sort of up to speed when it came to tech, and then recently I had someone from Qualcomm on the podcast, and I was just sitting there like I have no idea what's going on. So those conversations really also helped me get a read on the industry, and I think our listeners as well. Awesome. Hey, to wrap this up, do you have any final insights, tips, or tricks that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, I'd say the landscape is changing. Customers are demanding more, and so as people are evaluating, which vendors should I be working with, it's really kind of looking at them across a few dimensions. And I'd probably just say, look, plan, are the vendors you've worked with historically the ones that will take you in the next 5 to 10 years? That, are they really the ones that are investing in the technology in the right areas, that have the right partnership approach? We talk about 4 pillars here at Nutanix about, firstly having, a great product. So is the technology good? Then secondly, it's about, profitability. Have you got ways that you can make and build your business together with this vendor? And then long-term commitment to partnering. Are they demonstrating that in the way that they're acting? And then, it's trust, are the things that they're doing trustworthy? And, can you stand by the commitments that they're making? And so definitely for people that listen to this, I would say try and evaluate your channel choices across those 4 areas. Maybe you've got others that you might want to add to that. But I think if you choose and select vendors that, embody those 4 principles, like a table, if one of them's a bit wobbly, then the things will slide off it. So we try and live up to that here at Nutanix. And I think that's a great way to think about partnerships as you go forward.
Awesome. Words to live by. David, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts and taking the time to speak with me. And for you, dear listeners, thanks for tuning in, and see you in the next episode. Thanks, David.
Thanks a lot.